Hello, welcome to the recap of Thundercats from 1985 to 1989. There are four successive seasons, and by the way, there are spoilers. So without further ado, let's begin. Episode 1 begins with a Thunderian flagship that's leaving the planet Thundera that was once their home. That's Jaga. He's said to be the leader of them all, and we'll meet the rest of the Thundercats like Tigra, Panthro, Chitara, the Thunderkins, Wily Kid and Wily Cat, their faithful companion Snarf, and of course 12-year-old Lino. So even though Tiger tells Jugga that he isn't sure if Lionel could rule one day, but Jugga assures him that he will. So Chitara was sent by Jugga to wake up Lionel, who was sleeping in his room. So meanwhile in Lionel's room, that's when Chitara wakes him up and told him that Jugga needs them both on the bridge right away. So even though Lionel wasn't sure what Jugga wanted, so he did what Chitara said to do, and they both met up with Jugga on the bridge. So meanwhile, now that Jotaro and Lionel were on the ship's bridge, that's when, while looking at the screen, Lionel was told by Jugga some good news and some bad news. Well, first the bad news. The planet Thundera that they lived before is gone. It exploded. But Jugga told him some good news, that no matter where they live, the Dakota Thundera lives on. Truth, justice, honor, and loyalty. Then Jaga told Lionel something even better. He says that when he rules one day, the elders, Chitara, Panther, Tigra, and the kittens will be supporting him. So everybody was going to the sword chamber to show Lionel, Jaga that is, the most important weapon of all, the Sword of Omens. It'll be important in the entire series. Even more better is that the sword will wake up on its own when it's needed. According to Jaga, it has those psychic powers that no one else could see by looking through the sword's eye. Because as legend has it, the Eye of Thundera is very powerful. Now it's time for Chitara, Panther, and Tiger to get dressed. So they did just that. Chitara's up first, and she has the bow staff for a weapon. Next is Tigra with a bullet whip, which gives him some invisibility powers. Last up is Panther with some nunchucks, but little did every Thundercat know they're about to be under attack. While the attack is going on, Lionel was told by Jaga to stay behind, and so he did. But Jaga knows that Lionel won't be alone because Snarf is going to be with him. So when Jaga meets up with Tiger and others on the bridge, that's when they realize that Slide and his mutants are attacking them. And why? Because they're about to get their hands on that legendary sword themselves. Nobody knows why they want the sword so bad, desperately, but all they know is that they had to do what it took to get their hands on it whenever necessary. Well, the bad news is that the mutants got rid of the rest of the ships, well, except for the flagship itself, because that's what they're interested in anyway. Well, the mutant ship just used this grappling hook after it drills a hole in it, so now it's their chance to board the ship to look for this legendary sword, but not if the Thundercats have anything to do about it. So they and the mutants begin their attack. So that leaves Sly, the mutants' leader, and of course Jackalman to go to the sword room. So in the sword's room, that's when Snark tries to defend Lionel the best way he knew how, but unfortunately he got netted by Jackalman, so that leaves them, Jackalman and Sly, to face Lionel, and to convince him to give up the sword, but Lionel refused, but then something amazing happens. The sword's power gives Lionel enough strength to pick up the sword, and when the mutants saw what had happened, that's when they ran off. Well, now that the mutants had boarded their ship and got away, well, for now anyway, when Jaga and the others went to the sword room later, they were shocked and amazed that both Snarth and Lionel, who was 12 years old, were not exactly hurt. And that's when Lionel told Jaga that the sword did the work for him. So that's a relief for the Thundercats. So back on the bridge, Panthro gave some good news to the Thundercats. He said that even though the ship's engine's been shot, but the ship is otherwise intact. Also, the good news is there's a planet up ahead so that everybody can breathe once they let it inside. But the bad news is it's now, thanks to the mutants' attack, the planet they're going to was Third Earth at that time. It's light years away. So you know what this means? That means the Thundercats will have to be in their suspension capsules for the rest of the trip. So the Thundercats agreed to go into the suspension capsules, well, except for Jaga, of course, and he told them why. Because he said that even though the suspension will slow down the aging process, so in other words, he'll be an old man. So even though he makes it to third Earth, he'll never survive. So someone has to pilot the ship for the rest of the way, and the robot pilot to do the rest. So when the Thundercats heard this terrible news from Jaga, they now realized that they had no choice. So Lionel hugs his mentor goodbye as the rest of the Thundercats get into suspension capsules, and Lionel was the last one in sight with one last message from Jaga that the sword would be there when it's needed. So back with Jaga, who's piloting the ship as he grows older and older and older. And he, at the last minute, pressed the autopilot, hoping that the ship's autopilot would guide the rest of the way, and he finally disappears and dies. Well, good news, the ship makes it to third Earth, but the bad news, the grappling rings malfunction. Although the ship landed intact, the bottom falls apart, including its legendary sword and some suspension capsules. Well, the ship crashed but somewhat intact. The first one to come out of the suspension capsule was Snarf. First thing that Snarf did was to approach another suspension capsule that has Lino in it. And of course, Lino has trouble getting out of the capsule because he just hit his head. Then he goes to the water to look at his reflection, and as it turns out that, yep, he's all grown up. And that's when Snarf approaches him with a teddy bear, which he dismissed. But Lino and Snarf soon realize that they're not alone because the mutant ship has also arrived. And of course, Snarf has found the Sword of Omens. Well, luckily he did, because as the mutants were looking around for it, they didn't know that Snarf had it first, which Lionel at first dismissed as another toy. Back with the mutants as they search around, Jackalman approaches one of the capsules with something or someone inside and starts wrecking it with his axe. When Lionel saw what had happened, he leapt into action. Now Lionel's face to face with the same mutants that he fought before, and that's when, thanks to Snark, who flung him the sword with his tail, of course, that's when Lionel grabs it. And as the power surged through him, Lionel looked at the sword and he has no idea what was going on until Jaga appeared and told him that what he's holding in his hands is his destiny, the Eye of Thundera and the Sword of Omens itself. So after Jaga disappeared, now Lionel remembers, sight beyond sight, and he looks through his sword and saw Panthro, Chitara, the kittens, and Tigra still sleeping in their capsules. Now that Lionel knows what is going on, he summons the Thundercat signal, and when he did, all four of them leapt into action to join in the fight against the mutants, Chitara, the kittens, Tigra, and Panthro. So when the mutants knew that they couldn't stand a chance, they boarded aboard their ship and left. So right after the mutants in their ship left, Panthro made his case to say that the mutants are not going to rest until that sword's in their hands no matter what. But Lionel wouldn't allow it to happen as long as he's around, although the Thunderkins are not so sure of it. Although Panther says, now, kids, Lionel's doing his job, even though Chitara agrees and also Tiger agrees that Lionel's no longer a child. He's a grown man. So all the Thundercats had to do now, since Third Earth is now their new home, all they had to do next is to find a way to survive in a place like that. It's not like Thundera, although it may be true, but in the Thundercats' case, how many friends will they make along the way? Well, there's only one way to find out, but right now, that's the end of episode 1.